Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Voruna. First things first, let's go over the build. So with Voruna, I have one build with three slight variations. I'm opting for Pool instead of her fourth ability, as her fourth ability is still very bad, with high range for Fangs of Raksh. Now you may be wondering why I have so much range for Fangs of Raksh if I'm just going to be pulling in enemies. And the reason for this is because Fangs of Raksh does two things that Pool does not. It affects enemies behind the line of sight, and it affects enemies with Overguard, which is very useful. Combined with how this ability works with slash procs, means that you will pretty much instantly nuke anything in the 19 meter range if this ability applies a slash proc, and then you melee the primary target and kill them. Her first ability also is very good, as it guarantees that your melee will always proc slash, and it also means that it will always proc one other status effect, as this ability sets your status chance to 100% for your melee weapons, even if you only have like 2% status. As for the rest of the kit, it is just base duration, base efficiency with equilibrium is completely fine, and decent strength with Molt augmented and our focus skill of choice being Moderai, combined giving us 100% extra strength for 208% strength, giving us a nice little 4x crit multiplier from Shroud of Dinar. Duration doesn't really matter, as it only affects the first ability, but you're going to be casting this ability so much anyway that it doesn't matter. You don't need Prime Sure-Footed, as the passive that I recommend is the second one, which gives you total status immunity, completely negating the need for Prime Sure-Footed. Bring up a mod slot for Cunning Drift or whatever else you want to slot here. You do not need Energize, so you can freely run Arcane Strike to free up a mod slot on your melee weapon. The second variation of the build is Combat Discipline. The reason for this is because Voruna's one weakness is when her cat dies, you can no longer pick up health orbs to keep your sustain up. This completely negates that, as you will be losing health on kill, allowing you to pick up health orbs. It also allows you to run Arcane Avenger, which, if you want some more red crits, is always nice. The third build is a health build that is still shield gating. I haven't been able to test this build as I do not have a Roxa Kubrau that is formatted out, but it theoretically should work. As to the rest of the kit, it is an Argonac for its specific mod that allows you to armor strip enemies with daggers, Amalgam Serration for the sprint speed, and the rest of the mods are just there for the set effects. They don't really do anything. Primary Dexterity for the combo duration. Secondary is a Kuva Nucor for popping Nullifier Bubbles. Cascadia Flare, or Secondary Dexterity for even more combo duration, up to you. As for the daggers, I suggest the Bala or the Inodem. The reason I do not suggest the Karist is because one of Karist's biggest draws of why you should use it is its high status chance. But as I mentioned, Voruna's first ability sets your status chance to 100% regardless, so you're better off using a weapon with better base stats with low status chance, which is why I personally really prefer the Bala. The Bala's biggest weakness is only having 10% status chance, and Voruna completely negates it. As to the build itself, it's Gas to AoE armor strip, and for every enemy there to armor strip the other enemies, stripping armor very quickly. With Voruna, this means that pretty much every single hit with this weapon, or the Inodem, you're applying gas and a slash tick in one hit, which is really, really nuts. You may notice I don't have a Bane, and this is because you do so much damage that you do not need one. If you're going to level cap, sure, you can slot one instead of either Lasting Sting or Primed Reach. If you're using an Inodem, I suggest always replacing Primed Reach, as you already have enough range from Inodem's passive and its Incarnate form. If this Riven is just a heat mod supplement, so without it, it would just be Molten Impact. Focus skill of choice is of course Moderai for the 40% strength, and the companion is a Panzer with only one synth mod. You do not need the second synth mod, as this is the one that spawns health orbs, but Voruna can spawn synth orbs herself. So I suggest Pack Leader instead of that, just to try to keep it alive. One more thing is I suggest using Magus Anomaly on your operator to help pull in enemies every time you proc Madurai. Now moving on to the ranking portion of the video, we will be discussing Voruna in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, her KPM, secondly, her survivability, thirdly, her viability in the different game modes, and finally, how fun she is to play. All this data is sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path Mott run with no specters and no on-call. Now moving on to the first topic, her KPM. And Voruna is a melee frame that actually has multiple good abilities, which is a first for her category. She can easily spread statuses for condition overload, meaning that you do a lot of damage with your melee. On top of this, her build allows her to freely run high range to use a grouping tool. Alternatively, you can change the build slightly to run higher strength or something else to run a different helmet. She is a very versatile Warframe in what she can do. On top of this, her 2, when running max range, is a pretty much room nuke that just one-shots enemies anytime that it procs Slash. On top of this, she can easily synergize with a Suck ability and a Gas Dagger to armor strip to scale forever. In the footage you were seeing, this was pretty much day 2 or 3 for Voruna before I understood how her abilities fully worked, and on my Bala, I was using Weeping Wounds, which, as you should know by now, is a completely dead mod, as Voruna's 1 gives you a flat 100% status chance, which doesn't add on top of your mods, so Weeping Wounds was doing absolutely nothing. Now that I have primed Reach in this run, I would have gotten significantly higher KPM. Alternatively, that mod slot that was doing nothing could have been a Bane mod, and it would scale to level cap even easier. Despite having a complete dead mod slot, I still got over 6.8k kills in the 60-minute time span. That is very strong, especially when considering its scaling potential. Because of all these reasons, I'm going to give Voruna an S rank for her KPM, which is insanely high for a melee Warframe. Now, moving on to the second topic, her survivability, and there's not really much to be said here. She is a Warframe that doesn't really have any CC, but she has low shields, so she can very easily shield gate, and on top of that, she has pocket invisibility. Invisibility is by far the strongest tool for survivability in this entire game, outside of permanent invincibility, such as Revenant or spamming Vazarin Dash. Because of this, I'm going to give her survivability rank an A+. The reason it's not higher is because it's pocket invisibility rather than permanent invisibility. Now, moving on to the third topic, her viability, and this is where she slightly falls off, but it's not actually that bad. So, Voruna is very good in survival missions, and she's actually pretty good in disruption, even though I personally think that melee frames in disruption are typically bad. Don't get me wrong, I still wouldn't personally play Voruna in a disruption mission, but if I were to play a melee Warframe in a disruption mission, it would definitely be her. Her 2 pretty much would instantly prime the demo, and her 1 gives you a very high crit multiplier to help buff your damage versus the demo. On top of this, she is very free in terms of how she can build and her helmet, meaning that you could then throw on either Silence for increased survivability, or you could throw on Roar or Eclipse for even more damage. On top of this, her 1, on top of giving crit damage, forces your slash procs, meaning that your damage versus the demo would be absolutely cracked. So outside of survival and disruption, she falls off a little bit, but she's still good in average everyday missions such as captures and exterminates, because her 2 is still decent. It's not the best, as there's RNG involved in getting the right status procs, but her 1 gives her movement speed for speedrunning missions, and her 1 passive gives her parkour speed, again for speedrunning missions. All of this is slightly above average for the average Warframe, and she's just good in survivals rather than average, and, in my opinion, the best melee frame for disruption. So for all of these reasons, I will give her a flat A rank for viability. Now moving on to the final topic of, is she fun to play? And again, for a melee frame, I think she is extremely fun. I'm not sure why, but I think the reason is because she's kind of a caster melee frame, which I don't think exists in the game yet, other than somebody like Cora, who, in my opinion, isn't really a melee frame. She's more of just a strict caster. But Voruna, you're running around meleeing like other melee frames, but you're actively using your abilities to synergize with each other, and you're just a pseudo caster. On top of this, like I briefly mentioned in the last topic, she is very flexible in how she can build, which, if you have a lot of different ways you can build your Warframe, that leads to them being more fun, as they won't get stale as fast. And if you find one build to start getting boring, you can just simply switch to another one. Another thing to bring up here is her kit just simply works. A lot of Warframes find themselves having either no abilities that are good, or just 1 or 2. Voruna actually has 3 good abilities and 1 meme ability that is pretty bad, but does still hit decently hard in conjunction with her other abilities. Because of all these reasons, I will give her fun rank also a flat A, which in my opinion is very, very high for a melee frame, as it is my least favorite way to play this game. In conclusion, Voruna is an A+ tier Warframe who is surprisingly fun with different build options, with very good scaling potential in her KPM and survivability. She is also arguably one of the strongest, if not the strongest, melee frame in the game.